Okay, it's just loading. And you're good to go.
Hi, everybody. Welcome to our afternoon Q&A session. I hope that you've enjoyed the presenters that we've had. We've also got Liz joining us from the earlier morning session to answer questions that you sent through. Again, my colleague Bianca's here to assist, and we'll start by asking a few questions. We're going to start with Liz, I think. All right, Liz, because you were in the morning, so let's start with you. If beekeepers want to provide genetic information to the program, how can they go about that? And will you provide training or templates and those sorts of things like you've given to industry?
Yep, absolutely. So my colleague, Dr. Nadine Chapman from Sydney Uni, and I have been delivering workshops periodically to interested beekeepers in Plan B. And the latest one we had, where the Plan B selection manual had been published, we recorded that one. So that one is a really good teaching tool for anyone who's interested but wasn't able to attend a workshop so far. And it explains the critical pieces of information that beekeepers will need to think about how they are able to collect that in their operation in order to participate in the national database. So, for example, we'll issue them with a unique breeder ID that stays with them for however long they want to collaborate with the project. And they need to be able to track hives, so queen to hive, and some information about that queen's pedigree. So at least what that queen's mother was. So what is her origin, if it's from a different beekeeper, or basically you have to start somewhere to establish pedigree. So why not this season and get in touch with us?
Great. Do you have to be a New South Wales AA member or Queen Association member to participate in the program?
You definitely don't. So I would recommend the Australian Queen Bee Breeders Association as a budding organization that gets queen breeders together and kind of facilitates networks and mentoring across state borders. So get in touch with them, but you don't have to be a member of a formal body. Obviously, I'd recommend it because it's about networking and professional currency, getting to know those beekeepers in your state. But for example, now we've issued breeder IDs to breeders in Tassie, South Australia, our Better Bees WA counterparts, basically beekeepers in every state and territory except the ACT and the NT so far. Not huge numbers, but we're getting a few here and there.
Yeah, I'm sure that'll go up as it goes along. So there's a lot of talk about queens and where they come from, but how are you deciding what drones to use?
Yeah,
and,
so
are you sourcing them from diverse range of beekeepers?
Yeah, last year was really the startup for the program. We've been talking about it for a long time, and it's just been difficult to get that contract started with COVID delays and the stresses of drought and bushfire for accessing bees. So last season, we tried to cast the net out wide in terms of getting a sampling of diverse stock from around the country. So we started the population with representative genetics from the Australia's longest running breeding program in WA, selection from the Stevenses in Tasmania for something real different, and from Queensland, from Corinne Jordan, and from some New South Wales players, so Joe Horner, and our donating beekeepers that really established our seed stock production hive, so Lockwoods, and we had some key donors from the APRS Association, Mal Porter, Steve Cuniel, Stephen Target, Ray Hull, helping us get that seed stock going. So the goal this season is for me to inseminate a lot more queens. So this past season, we had a large amount of naturally mated queens, but obviously with artificial insemination, I can, track to specific colonies where those drones came from. So the queens from last season I inseminated that we've sold us a select few so far this month, I provide with that queen the origin of the drones that I use to inseminate that queen. So that's something new that beekeepers haven't had access to before, and it gives them kind of a good insight into differences that they see from there.
Yeah, great. And you sort of partially answered my next question. Is the thing that everybody is waiting for is, when will the queens be available to the broader public?
Yes. So we're trying to be pretty strategic, because obviously as a government agency, we don't we don't have the capacity to compete with industry. We want to really focus on the research side of it and upskilling industry as well to empower them to collect their own records, to get familiarized with the database and the process of getting a breeding value from their stock. So the goal is to have 80 AI queens for sale this season and then the following season. So we've got limited sales to queen breeders that will mass produce naturally mated queens from there at the present time. So just selling a limited number in October to that category of the queen production sector, and then we'll open that up a bit wider for the end of the season sales. So if anyone's interested, we are selling them at a breeder rate, so that's $1,000 per AI queen, and I've got a wait list developing, so just let me know.
Excellent. Very exciting. Thanks, Liz. Bianca, we might jump over to one of your people.
Yeah, cool. There might be a bit of noise for my family at the moment. So, okay, I'm going to go to Rod. So Rod, I've got a few here for you. With the apparent increase in small hive beetle numbers, do you think we need to implement multiple methods of control within hives rather than a single method as in the past?
Definitely. And again, like any problem, it all depends how big your problem is as to how much you should throw at it. So if you are in an area that sees very few beetles, you can probably just stay with one type of control. But once you start to see that you have controls in the hive and you still got a lot of beetles, you need to start ramping it up, having traps in different places in the hive, and maybe looking at things like the good old aperthor, which is good old standby that should be there as much as possible, with your traps underneath the baseboard, and then different traps through the hive, just to try and give the bees opportunity wherever the beetles are actually located to be able to push them into traps to get rid of them. So yes, the worse your problem, the more that you need to throw at them to keep them under control.
Yeah, cool. And it's definitely fluctuates with the seasons. So sometimes you might need all that. One year you may not, depending on the humidity and all that sort of stuff with the rain around your area.
Yeah.
Is any process in the pipeline, I think it's meaning to say, to get APVMA to approve the use of permethrin? Did I say that right? Permethrin on the ground around the hives as a control measure for the larvae. The last permit expired in 2009. We definitely need to have this discussion. I think it's something that's come up.
And I do know permethrin is a chemical that has a broad range of victims when it gets used. And I have heard where beekeepers have sprayed it on the ground to control the larvae from hive beetle slime outs, and then later on they've actually killed a lot of their own bees because they've come in contact with residue. And I bring into question the fact that it hasn't been renewed probably does show that there are some negative side effects of using a chemical that it's not a selective chemical. It's very, it's going to kill anything that it touches, which is probably not good, especially for things like worms and other things. So unless an industry body had an intent to want to investigate getting a new license, I wouldn't have thought they're probably going to use it again. They should be looking for something that's more selective. I might quickly throw it to Liz to see if she's got something else to add to that.
Yeah, I guess the only other thing is it seems to be in one of those categories of a more of a feel good to the beekeeper, that they might be doing something that's not actually having as Rod said, the targeted intended effect. And small hive beetle larvae can crawl, meters from the hive to dig into the ground and pupate. So if it doesn't get them,
yeah, it's certainly not a good biodiverse option, really. In any case, there's other methods to do that, and prevention's better, I suppose, in other ways. So
yeah, it's probably like closing the gate after the horse is bolted. We need to look at more preventative measures up front if possible, maybe more monitoring of hives so that they get picked up before they become a massive slime out, that we'd need to do something like this.
Yeah, awesome. That's great. Thanks to both of you for that. Would you like me to keep going on one more, or are you going to ask some now, Kelly? What would you... I might go. I can't hear you. I'm looking at the other screen. So let's go. To Dr. Neural, if you would like to start some questions. So first up, you use a lot of well-known honey types. Have you considered using imported honey off the shelf with less % of Australian floral types for the testing that you do to work out if it's comparison to the honeys you've currently used, which are obviously all provided from Australian sources?
Yeah, it's a really good question. And one of the main reasons that we work with the type of honey that we do is because we can go back to the beekeeper and talk to them about floral source and talk to them about the health of the bees, talk to them about the location, the conditions, how much honey they harvested. What we're finding is that because every single honey has a different composition, even honeys from the same floral source, it's really hard to link a bioactivity to a particular component. So we can see some honeys will have a really high antibacterial activity. It seems to be sort of related to the floral source, but there's so many other things that can influence it as well. Same with the prebiotic activity. We can say that there are a few components in honey that are really driving this activity, but the exact composition changes, and that exact activity that we see then changes as well. So if we can start off with really defined honeys, and we can get as much information as we can about the floral source and all of the other environmental processing storage conditions, and link the bioactivity, what we're hoping to do then is to form a kind of quicker screen and then run lots of different types of honey, whether that's imported honey, lots of international honeys, and other types of Australian honeys, mixed honeys, and see how that activity compares. So we're working on it, but it's just still a lot of unknowns.
Yeah, excellent. No, it's good to know. It's good to know why, because there's so much more to it than we realise. Yeah. Have all the constituents of honey been identified, and do you think they might contribute to the inability of bacteria to develop resistance to honey?
A really good question as well. So honey has over 200 components, like any given honey, and they all seem to contribute something, but not necessarily to the same level. So in terms of the antibacterial activity, we have a pretty good idea of what's really driving that type of activity, and it's things like the high sugar, the low pH, then you've got the production of hydrogen peroxide. But then we've got floral factors and bee-derived factors as well. So there are antimicrobial peptides, which are very small proteins that have this activity themselves. And then we've got things like the phenolic compounds, phenolic acids, flavanols, tannins. So all of these things, we know that they exist. There are different types and different types of honey and different quantities in different types of honey as well. And they all seem to contribute overall to that antimicrobial activity. And what we think the reason for this lack of bacterial resistance is that it's not a single compound that's working against bacteria. That's how antibiotics work. They're a single compound. So when we break the honey down into those major compounds, if we look at just MgO, just hydrogen peroxide, just sugar, the bacteria can quickly develop resistance to those compounds as well. But when we start building the honey back up and combine those different components, we see that it's much longer for that bacteria to become resistant, if they can become resistant at all. So we can't yet build a whole natural honey in the lab, but we can add lots of different components, and we can see that resistance is really, really slow to develop when we start adding more and more components.
Basically, you can't beat nature.
Yeah. Exactly. And it makes sense because bees and honey and bacteria have been evolving for a lot longer than we've been using honey as a medicine, right? So
awesome. Great. I'm going to one quick more. What is the amount of honey that is taken? I don't know if maybe they didn't catch that part of your presentation. So
in the clinical trials that we're using only a tablespoon of honey, which is about 20 grams a day, and that's what we found was having an effect already, and that's what we've stuck with for the rest of the studies. It's really important for us to keep it a realistic amount. We don't want to be telling people to eat 3 kilos of honey a day. That's just not realistic at all. And
I reckon beekeepers might disagree. Beekeepers might want you to say more. But a tablespoon basically. Yeah. And that can be in something that's not necessarily just eating it off a spoon, but in a drink, in a piece of food, like you said.
We didn't ask the volunteers to eat it in a particular way. So some people cooked with it, some people put it in their tea or coffee as a sugar replacement. And that was really cool to see, actually, because a lot of the different types of bioactivity can be affected by storage or processing conditions like heat, for example. But some people were baking with their honey and it didn't seem to have an effect on the overall prebiotic activity. So
yeah, super interesting.
Yeah, I'd be interested to see if you tracked that, how they actually took it and what impact that had on the activity
Yeah,
of
if
the
there's a
honey
bit
as
of
well.
other data. Yeah.
Yeah.
We're hoping to do that in the next couple of studies. Humans are a little bit difficult to work with because their diet is very diverse and they're not always honest about what else they're eating.
Yeah.
So in the lab models, we are trying to tease that apart a bit more.
Great.
Cool. Oh, I'm going to hand over to you, Kelly.
Okay, fantastic. Anna, we'll go to you. So if you don't have a powerful pollinators region bioguide for your region, what can when will there be one that's published in the place that someone lives? I notice there's a smaller range at the moment. Are there more coming?
There certainly are. There's going to be about 30 guides. Will be collect the set, if you like, for different bioregions around Australia. And so keep an eye on the Ween Bee Foundation page. Look up Powerful Pollinators and you can see the guides that have been currently uploaded. See if there may be one for your region.
Excellent.
There's new ones that are going to be uploaded through this year and into next year, further guides under development. If there is a region that you have an interest in a guide being developed for and you contact us and we say, oh, that's not on our list of guides to be developed, then we're happy to have a chat about what's involved in terms of the costs to have a particular guide produced, and it would potentially be an ideal project for perhaps a land care network or a conservation group where they may have some funding that they're looking towards putting towards a project that has great biodiversity benefits and has a really good element of community engagement as well. So there's all sorts of opportunities if people are seeking a particular region to have a guide developed for.
Fantastic. That's really great. What if someone lives in a flat or a townhouse or in a city? Can they contribute? Can they put a bee-friendly garden on their rooftop or balcony?
Absolutely. And it could be on a balcony. It could be, if you don't have a balcony, you can have window boxes on the outsides of your kitchen window or something. If you have access to the rooftop or a common shared area, you could consult with the other residents in your complex and see if you can come up with some ways that you can create havens for pollinators. Even if you're a few stories off the ground, you're still going to be attracting flying insects because they will find what you put there. And the more small dwellings that even have small patches of biodiversity, and it could be a range of edibles that you're planting to use in your kitchen, but you let some of them flower. You might be planting coriander and you just let it go to flower, don't cut it down. Mint, basil, thyme, all of those things that you can keep quite compact but will attract pollinators. And if you've got a bit of wall space, you can create some nesting and breeding spaces for some of our native bees, and they'll come and make themselves very happy in there.
Great. And you sort of led into the next question in that most of the guides are Indigenous or native species. What kinds are there guides out there that people can access that talk about other species of plants as well, so non-Indigenous plants?
That's a really good question. And in developing these guides for particular bioregions and looking at insect pollinators as a whole group, not just honeybees, and knowing that there are sometimes very particular and precise relationships between certain plant species and certain pollinator species, by focusing on various Indigenous plants native to each bioregion, it's just lifting the game a little bit in terms of what people can plant to attract the biggest range of pollinators possible and to support them. And if you consult any sort of mainstream gardening books or even pop into your local sort of larger brand garden centres, they will probably have a whole range of species that are more commonly known as bee-friendly plants, such as your lavenders and sage and more of your ornamental introduced species that are popularly sold for attracting honeybees. Also, native pollinators will take advantage of them. But in focusing on the Indigenous species in the Powerful Pollinators guides, it's just to really give people the opportunity to support our native bees as well as honeybees.
Yeah, fantastic. I guess the message is plant a diverse range of pollen and nectar-bearing plants and habitat plants for a range of pollinators, not just honeybees.
That's it. Yeah, and have something flowering as much of, across the year as you can. So don't just grow things that only flower in summer. See if you can.
Yeah, and I mean, if they're native and they're in the regions, they're going to grow better, and they're going to be, more water tolerant, drought tolerant. Going to be specifically for those areas, which I think is really important for gardeners too. It makes life a bit easier.
That's right.
Growing an impossible plant in an environment where it's going to die anyway. So
and it's a great way to connect people to what used to be a lot more abundant in their region and possibly has been lost to some extent. So
awesome.
It's win-win.
Yeah, because I imagine that one of the critical things, is the habitat, not just providing food, but actually habitat plants for these pollinators as well.
Yeah, definitely. And to go back to the question about if you've just got, pocket handkerchief size space as opposed to, establishing pollinator plantings on a large mixed enterprise farm, for example, you can choose plants that give you that textural difference as well. So you're not just looking at flower colours and different species and different flowering times, but you can choose things that might have scaly bark or multi-stemmed. They have lots of cracks and crevices, or things that a little bit of a ground cover that you can still have the bare soil for ground nesting bees, but they can get between the twigs of the ground cover as opposed to, hard to move mulch situation and things like that, and you still get the weed control. So it's you can sort of adapt it to suit your circumstances, and even small benefits are good. You don't have to, if everyone does a small bit, then it all adds up to big impacts.
Yeah, fantastic. Thank you.
Thank you.
Jump back to you, Bianca.
Sure thing. Okay, Cooper. A couple for you now. You talked about 80% loss after 1 year with some of the new beekeepers that you've worked with. Are these stats for the countries that you work in, or are they more global? And what do you think contributes to this loss?
Yeah, it's a really good question. I guess there's a number of different things to consider. We always like to think that there's just one individual factor that's leading to the demise of bee colonies or even beekeepers, operating in a beekeeping enterprise. I guess across the board in many low and middle income countries, we keep seeing lots of programs being implemented by good-meaning agencies that are trying to get people enthusiastic about bees and to take on beekeeping as an income strategy. But they just don't have that long-term ongoing support that a lot of beekeepers need to be successful. And so we're seeing that in a lot of different countries, but also lots of losses in overall industry numbers. And that's for a whole range of different reasons. The introduction of the small Asian honeybee, Apis cerana, the varroa mites, so Varroa jacobsoni, and also Tropicalaps mites, and they're all sort of in combination, as well as a lot of loss in floral resources. So clearing of forests in a lot of these developing countries is very rampant and can have a really big impact on the industries.
Yeah, and obviously, I mean, your program has parts of it that deal with learning about business and looking at marketing, and without the income and the ideas of getting those products out there, it's also another factor, isn't it? That it's not just climatic, it's not just bee diseases and management, it's also that business side of things as well, which sometimes by the end of the 12 months or so, I think that's probably a big thing where you're starting to maybe not see the money coming back, and yeah, that can be a big factor too. So you've got measures for those things too, in terms of trying to give people encouragement and education on using business skills and learning new business skills.
Yeah, absolutely. And the profitability of anyone's bee business is something that's really critical. It's the underlying sort of, that's the bottom line, isn't it? And I guess that's something really important, particularly in some of these regions where not a lot of people go to school. People grow up in very rural areas and they might be, involved in a program, but, it also might be a small investment cost for them, but that cost might be very significant. And generally speaking, we find that lots of beekeepers don't own that many hives, but they can still run a pretty profitable business. They might only have 20 beehives, but that might be 30% of their income. So it's a pretty important source of income for a lot of communities.
Yeah, and that's awesome to see them doing that sort of thing over there with, little communities that will support them as a small business as well. And the next question is, are you training locals to become teachers in their own beekeeping communities? So thinking about the giving a fish versus teaching fishing analogy.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a great analogy. That's definitely a big part of the program. We're not sort of going overseas and saying, this is what you should be doing, this is what your industry should look like. It's more about consultation with industry, hearing about what their major problems are, and then trying to work them out together and solve them together as a team. We got a whole bunch of different trainers come together to give peer-to-peer feedback on a theoretical topic and also on practical topics. It's been something that's really great. We put a paper out on that. So yeah, definitely. And it's about beekeeping training, but it's also about their research capacity, so that we've got people who are not just beekeepers, but also people that are working for their local governments overseas that we have in some of our nearest neighbours and countries that have the technical skills to be able to understand what's going on there. So we've got eyes on the ground for our industry here in Australia. If we've got beekeepers overseas that know what they're looking at, they can say, oh, we've got a new pest and disease pressure. It's a new threat to our country. So that means it's closer to our borders. So it's part of scientific capacity building as well as that technical bee skills.
Yeah, wonderful. Thanks, Cooper.
Okay, Fiona, last but not least, got some questions for you as well. So you were talking about bee-friendly farming. Basically, do the people approach you to become certified, or are you seeking out people for the program? So how does it sort of work?
Yeah, no, that's a good question. So it probably works a bit of both ways because it's a new program. The people can apply online. So there's a Bee Friendly Farming website, Bee Friendly Farming Australia website, and people are able to apply online via that website. So a lot of the applications just come in from places, people we've never met before. But we also have been doing a lot of strategic work with industries, for example. So, we've had a number of conversations. The almond industry is a good example. Obviously, pollination is really important for them, and we have strong relationships with the almond industry. So we have developed a strategic relationship with the Almond Board of Australia. They're actively promoting it to their almond industry stakeholders, and so it's sort of working both ways there. But it's a number of different industries too. So, the apple industry, so avocados. So part of it's at the industry level and part of it's just individuals who are probably leading the game in their industry and know how important it is. And they're already there. So they want a way of being able to communicate that to their customers, be able to say what we're doing is bee-friendly farming. We're already doing it and we want you to know that we're doing it.
Yeah, so you talked about almonds and them being on board. So what kind of things are they planting? Are you using the pollinator guides or are they planting other kinds of crops? I'm just curious about specifics,
both.
I guess.
Both. So in the presentation, there was a photograph of an interrow planting, and that had a number of, canola, brassica type species in it. But it really varies. What the message coming through loud and clear is that every farm, every enterprise is different and unique. And some people go, well, we can't irrigate. We've got no capacity to irrigate. So that and there's limited rainfall. That's going to limit what can grow. So we need to be looking at what can grow and provide flowers in a drought tolerant environment. Other people are saying, well, we've got to mow it. We can't leave it there for long. So the system, what's going to make bee-friendly farming powerful and work is its flexibility to start from the farm, the landholder, what their goals are. Are they trying to provide flowering at the shoulder periods of the almond crop? and that's what their focus is. It's honeybees. It's about providing floral resources for honeybees at either side of the pollination window. Is that the goal? Or is the goal to supplement pollination outcomes by having an increased number and diversity of native pollinators to assist, to give that 5% improvement beyond what honeybee pollination is going to achieve? So, you know, it's a journey, and it's working with landholders where they're at with what their goals are, and then helping to sort of expand that and grow that over time. So we see it as a learning. Being part of bee-friendly farming is a learning exercise.
Yeah, I'm curious, is there any resistance from some of the farmers about, if I plant something, the bees aren't going to pollinate my crop, they're going to go over here preferentially?
Absolutely not at this
Okay.
point.
Yeah.
And, you know, I think we're seeing the early adopters at the moment. The people that are applying right now, people that are already doing it, they're there, they know it's important. So the first wave is all about people that are already there. And, you know, I probably didn't finish the other part of the question with what's the almond industry planting. Well, with the tree grants, we had a number of almond industry, I think it was 64 hectares worth of pollinator habitat we're going to be supporting with the tree grants. Nearly $50,000 worth of tree grants we're about to award. And a number of those are on almond farms, not all of them, but a number are on almond farms. And in some cases, they're using the powerful pollinator guides to look at planting Indigenous species to support the generalised availability of pollen.
And just one last question, is there a sort of size limit for being certified as a bee-friendly farmer, or is it just simply that 3% of the land that you're aiming for?
Yeah, it's 3% floral resources, and the crop can be included in that 3%.
Yep.
But the crops generally only flower for a very short window. So, you know, it can't be just the crop. It's got to make sure that there's other floral resources when the crop's not flowering as well. That's critical. So, you know, if you looked at it, you pick the almond industry, you know, the almond industry knows they've got to increase their floral resource availability, and they're actively doing that. But that's because prior to that, it was a bit of a desert either side of the pollination window. So it's shifting away from that. So, you know, it's an exciting time because the bee-friendly farming program, and partnered with powerful pollinators, you know, it's really having an impact. We're making a difference.
Yeah, it's great. It's a good combination.
Mm.
I think we've asked most of the questions. Did anyone that presented this afternoon have anything that they wanted to add, something they felt they didn't cover in their talk? No, I think
You're all very well, well behaved presenters.
You are. Thank you so much to our afternoon panel of experts for joining us. It's been a really fantastic day. I'm glad that you could contribute to the Tocal Beekeepers Field Day. We really appreciate your time and energy in making what has been a fantastic day. So thank you very much.
Thanks for hanging out. And to all the listeners, don't forget to fill out our Q&A. So we're going to post that in YouTube comments and Facebook comments. If people see this later, please fill out the Q&A for a survey for our listeners, so we can make this better and better every year. It's been really great. I hope that people take away from this and do something great with their beekeeping enterprise, or their farm, or their backyard, or their balcony, or their queens, whatever they might be doing. And I hope it's been worthwhile for everyone. Certainly been great for us.
Yep. Thanks for joining us.